And technically, you have to remain in the standard plan for up to 12 months before switching to another plan. Now, at least some of the servicers in the direct loan program would allow you to switch after just 1 month, but not all of them currently. The Department of Education is working at resolving that issue. Now, another feature of IVR that makes it different from standard and extended repayment is that with IVR, it's possible for you to have a minimum monthly payment that is less than the accrued interest, which is technically called negative amortization. With the standard plan, with the graduated plan, and with extended repayment, your monthly payment has to at least equal the accrued interest. You cannot have negative amortization. But with IBR and with income contingent repayment, it actually is permitted that if you can't afford it, your monthly payment could actually be less than the accrued interest. Now that's not really a good thing because it means your debt's actually getting bigger. Because that interest is accruing and at some point it has to be repaid. But it's going to accrue as simple interest until one of two things happens. Either you no longer have a partial financial hardship, in which case it gets capitalized or added to the principal, or you voluntarily choose to exit IBR and go to a different payment plan. Because then it has to become part of the principal. Because what you're always repaying is principal plus accrued interest that month. So the result is that you end up with increased debt. Now again, if all you can afford, let's suppose you're working for a 501c3 nonprofit and you're earning $45,000. Then according to this chart, your monthly payment would be $358. And I can guarantee you that that's not covering all the interest on $150,000 of debt. The interest alone is over $1,000 a month. So in that case, you would be experiencing negative amortization. But the reality is, if your income is only $45,000 a year, you probably can't afford $1,000 a month. Does that make sense? All right. Now, this in words explains what I've already said previously, and that is, in the event that you are experiencing negative amortization in IBR with your monthly payment, then any unpaid interest that's accruing on your subsidized Stafford or subsidized direct loans, or any portion of a consolidation loan that was originally a subsidized Stafford or subsidized direct loan, then the government's going to pay that portion of interest that you're not paying for up to the first 3 years you're in IBR. And this is a benefit to you that you would not get with income contingent repayment. Now with the unsubsidized loans, they're not paying the interest, and that also does not apply to Perkins loans because you can't repay Perkins with IBR, and once a Perkins is consolidated, it loses its subsidy. The maximum loan repayment period, and this is part of the what other information you need to know, is 25 years. And if after being in IBR for 25 years you still have remaining debt, any debt remaining is going to be forgiven. But under the current tax code, any amount forgiven would be taxable. Now my guess is they will try to change that before the first person might qualify for this. And the first person who's likely going to qualify for this, it won't happen until the year 2034. Because this payment plan became available on July 1st of 2009. And so 25 years would have to elapse before anybody would qualify. If you had 25 to 09, you get 34.
And this would require staying in IBR for the entire time?
Yes, it would be required in IBR, or it's a little more technical than that. It means you have to be experiencing financial hardship through that entire period of time. If you were in IBR the whole time, that would meet that requirement. If you were in income contingent repayment during any part of that time, that would also count. Or if you were qualified for an economic hardship deferment, it would count. And any months in which you paid at least what would be required under the standard 10-year payment plan would count. But in general, I think most people who go into IBR are not likely going to leave it. And so it's just easier to explain it in this way. It's a little bit more simplified. There are some calculators available that would allow you to come up with an estimate of what your monthly payment would be under IBR, and they are listed here. The first two give you sort of imprecise calculations, but they give you an estimate. CNA.org gives you a very precise estimate, but unfortunately that website, the calculator, has not been updated to reflect the 2011 poverty guidelines. Mapping Your Future also has one. And I also, in the back of your handout, on page 21, I actually go through the steps that are the calculation steps for the IBR payment. So you can actually calculate it yourself. as long as you knew the federal poverty guidelines. And I've actually given you a chart of what the federal poverty guidelines are on the previous slide on the bottom of page 20. But just recognize that that chart will get updated whenever the poverty guidelines change each year. All right, do you have any questions about IBR? Because this is the last slide on IBR.
I have a question about just all the plans and how easy it is to move in and out. Is that just that 12-month requirement?
The question is, how easy is it to move from one payment plan to another if you want to change plans? And it's as easy as contacting your loan servicer. However, technically, you're only allowed to switch plans once every 12 months. They may allow you to do it more frequently, but they're not required to. Secondly, it may require that you fill out some forms, because, for example, if you're an extended repayment and you're wanting to switch to IVR, there are forms you have to fill out for them to determine your eligibility and your monthly payment in IVR. But the first step is to contact the servicer, and it may require nothing more than that, or they may require some additional steps. Chances are you're not going to do a lot of switching. The most likely reason you would switch is because you initially picked one plan and things have changed and you can't continue to afford to pay that much. And so you need to try to move to a plan where you could pay less. If the reason you're wanting to switch is because you want to pay more, you can pay more without switching plans because you have the right to make prepayments without penalty. And the advantage to you of doing that, rather than switching to a plan that would require you to pay more, is that when you're making a voluntary payment, when you're paying more than the required minimum, you get to decide what loan that is applied to. And if you have both Stafford and Grad Plus loans, it would be better to prepay your Grad Plus loan that has the slightly higher interest rate, because then you would get more of a financial benefit from doing so. However, if you want some discipline to be sort of enforced on you, because you're not sure you would actually always pay more when you could afford to do it, and you'd like the payment plan to sort of be enforcing that, then that might be a reason. In fact, it's the only reason I can think of why you would switch to, say, the standard plan, because you want to pay more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions about the payment plans? All right, let's quickly look at, because I know I've gone over my time, I'm sorry, but I do want to go over this because this really is where the rubber hits the road. Remember that $150,000? And remember that $80,000? That was the average amount owed and the average or median starting salary for the class of 2011. This chart shows you what the monthly payments would be under each of the 5 available payment plans on federal direct loans. As you would expect, the most expensive is going to be the standard 10-year plan, but it also results in the lowest amount of interest paid over the life of repayment. All right? Graduated, starts out interest only for the first 2 years, that's $928. Then it jumps to $2,079 because you still have to have the debt paid off in 10 years. And so in order to get the principal paid off in the remaining 8 years, you actually have to pay more per month than you would have had to pay under the standard plan. Under the extended plan, you have both a fixed or a graduated option. And since you have the graduated option extended, which gives you the same initial interest-only payment, that's why I don't think the graduated plan under the 10-year option is one you would ever choose. Because that jump is such a significant potential jump. All right, under extended, it would be $1,101 if you chose the fixed option, or it would be $928 and then jump to $1,135 if you chose graduated. And you see that you'd pay a lot more in interest. However, you have to be careful. You cannot compare those amounts with the amounts for the standard and the graduated, because we're comparing payment streams over 2 different lengths in time. And these are not what we call in economics present value calculations. They're simply a stream of payments over time. But it's not taking into account the impact of inflation. And $1 today is going to purchase more than $1 next year because of inflation. And so it's possible that if inflation were high, that this would actually cause you to have less lost purchasing power than if you chose the 10-year plan. Does that make sense? So I wouldn't focus on this column, I'd focus on this one. But truth in lending requires that I show you this information. Now for income contingent and income based, because we have to recalculate your monthly payment every 12 months, I don't want to try to guess on how your income might change over time or how your household size might change. So I'm only going to give you what it would be for the first 12 months. And here again, this illustrates why I think income-based is a better option than income contingent. The other reason being the subsidy issue. And we can't know how much it would cost over the life of repayment because I don't know how your payments will change beyond the first 12 months. But the reality is, what is likely going to be the choice for this borrower? It's going to be this. Because this is likely the only option based upon all the other expenses that that person would have with $80,000 of income that they can afford. They're not likely going to be able to afford the other options unless they have resources other than their own income to be paying back their loans. Or they have unusually low living expenses. Any questions about this? Now, unfortunately, I do not know of any place you can go on the internet where there's a calculator where you can enter in how much you owe and your income, and it would spit out the numbers to fill in this chart. I'm hopeful that within the next few years, particularly one of the servicers in the direct loan program or the Department of Education will in fact create a calculator like this. The Department of Education actually does have a calculator that would do it, provided all of your debt had the same interest rate, because they only allow you to enter in one loan amount and one interest rate, and then it does spit out this kind of information. But for you, you have loans at different interest rates, so unfortunately, you can't easily use that calculator without sort of entering information multiple times. All right, picking your plan. I'm only going to cover this slide. You need to set your goals, which we talked about, and there's more slides about that. You need to figure out your budget, because obviously you need to figure out how much you can afford to repay. You also need to think about, should you be using money to pay off your more expensive debt, like credit card debt, before you actually pay off your student loans. Remember that you have the right to prepayment. We've talked about that. This slide just goes into that in more detail. The one thing I would ask you to note is that when prepaying a loan, there are several important things. Number one, if you want to make a prepayment on a loan, before you do it the first time, make sure you contact the servicer and find out where you should send the payment if you can't make it online. Now, a number of the direct loan servicers actually allow you to make prepayments online. But if your servicer doesn't have that capability, and therefore you have to send in a check, it's very likely that they're going to want you to send that payment to an address that's different from where your normal monthly payments are going, because of how they operate their payment processing system. You also want to make sure that you tell them, you provide instructions that they're to apply the prepayment to principal. They can't do that. They have to first pay off any interest that's accrued, but you at least want to ask for it. Because if the rules ever change, you want to make sure you're getting this right. You also need to make sure you tell them which loan you want to prepay. Because if you don't, then they're not going to know how to apply the payment. And so without any other information, they're going to apply it to all of your loans proportionally. And then you're not going to necessarily get the maximum benefit, because you should be targeting it at that loan which has the highest interest rate, which for you is likely to be red plus. Preparing for contingencies. Just know that you have the option to get deferment or forbearance if you need it, or you can change to IBR or a different payment plan if you need to lower your monthly payments. Consolidation is an option, but the typical reasons people consolidate are because they either need to simplify the process because they have multiple lenders and multiple servicers, and at least for the loans you have through the law school, you don't. You have one lender, the Department of Education, and one servicer. Another reason would be because you have loans that are not currently have fixed rates. Any Stafford loans or direct loans you borrowed prior to July 1st of 2006 have a variable interest rate that right now is at 1.76% if the loan's in deferment. And it would be great if you could lock in that low rate, and you can by consolidating those loans. But the loans you've gotten in law school already have a fixed rate, so this is not a reason for consolidating those loans. And finally, if you have FFEL loans or Perkins loans, they're not eligible for the public service loan forgiveness program. But if you consolidate them into the direct loan program, then that debt would become eligible for public service loan forgiveness, which might be a third reason. A fourth reason used to be that it was a way to get a lower monthly payment. But with the introduction of IBR, that really gives you the ability to get the lower monthly payment without having to consolidate. And you'll learn more about consolidation when you go through exit counseling. Just a few final words. Again, I really think you need to develop an action plan, which involves checking your loan history at NSLDS, notifying your loan servicers of address changes and making sure you're reading all the mail from your servicers, and developing your loan timeline so that you know when you're going to need to take action, and selecting the payment plan that's going to best meet your needs when the time comes. Because if you don't pick a plan, you're going to be put on the standard plan. And as I've said before, if your goal is to get this debt paid off as fast as you can, then maybe the standard plan is the best option. But I think for most people, it's going to be better to choose either extended or income-based, so that either you'll have more cash available to target your payments at your more expensive debt, or because you can't afford what's required under the standard plan. For more information, there's a number of websites. The Federal Student Loan Database, or the Federal Department of Education has the website studentloans.gov. That's the portal into all information about the federal loan programs. For more information about consolidation, you can go to loanconsolidation.edu.gov. Let me point out the bottom website, Equal Justice Works. We haven't really talked about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. I will be doing a seminar about that in the spring. I encourage you to come to that if you are planning a career in public service. But you can get more information about student debt relief options available to those who are pursuing either a career as a public interest or public sector attorney by going to equaljusticeworks.org. And with that, just make sure that before all is said and done, and before repayment begins, you understand this terminology for these terms, because these all relate to successfully manage your loans. Because I think you can be successful in repaying your loans and achieving your other financial goals, but it means that you need to take charge, you need to develop a plan and have a strategy. And I hope the information we presented here can help you get started on the right path. I encourage you to consider signing up for an appointment to meet with me individually either this week or when I come back in the spring. There's some additional slides in the handout that should be pretty self-explanatory, and I'll let you take a look at that. And with that, thank you for your time.
Some workshop evaluations forms that you guys
Yes, please fill out the evaluation.